The good news of Jesus Christ, according to the Gospel of St. Luke in the 20th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her. And so, in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living. For in him all of them are alive. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. Here in this Gospel of Luke, we get to meet the Sadducees. Not a lot of stories about the Sadducees, but this one here we have. The Sadducees were in charge of the temple. They had a lot at stake, and they were threatened by this itinerant preacher, Jesus. The things that he said, the things that he did. He was attracting a lot of attention, gaining a lot of followers. He was challenging the status quo, even the temple itself. They had to do something. They had to challenge back. Now, the Sadducees, we were told, did not believe in the resurrection. That's really a focus later on in the Hebrew Bible, early on in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, the Pentateuch. These were the books that the Sadducees focused on. So resurrection was out of their range, not something they believed in. Here we have their challenge. Their joke, if you will. A little parable for Jesus. He was one for giving parables. They had one for him this time, hoping to foul him up, that he might say or do something wrong in regards to this, that they might point out and discredit him, dishonor him. And so we have this story of a man married to a woman. The man passes away, and in those ancient times and ancient ways, the woman was property of that man, property of that family, and so she would pass on from one brother to the next, and something so ridiculous it's hard to believe. Brother after brother, 7 brothers, all dead. Now the text does not blame the woman, and neither am I, but we have to think there's something suspicious here. I think much more likely there's a genetic disorder, one brother and then the next. But they put this to Jesus, mocking him, mocking the resurrection. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? She had married them all. You can tell they don't think much of this resurrection business. But Jesus responds. Jesus comes out of not a Sadduceic tradition, but of a Pharisaic tradition. one that believed in the resurrection, believed in an end time when good and evil would have a final battle, good would win and overcome, and a whole new creation would happen. So Jesus enlightens them, taking the initial story right off the table by saying, in the next life, there's no death. No one is given in marriage. No one is taken in marriage, this exchange of property. It's not that kind of existence at all. Marriage is an earthly matter. It's not for the next life. In the next life, we transcend even the great gift of marriage. The next life is something so wonderful, so great that even some of the best parts of this life barely compare. It's not an issue. And then Jesus redirects them to show them that even in their scriptures, you can see the resurrection. Jesus points back to the story of Moses and the burning bush and the interaction between God and Moses, where God is called the Lord of the ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, not was the God of them, but is the God of them in a continuing, ongoing sense. And then Jesus makes this bold claim, and I think sings to our hearts, our faith, our hope, that God is not the God of the dead, but God is the God of the living. And to God, all of them are alive. I think this calls us to ministry of the living, even living beyond death. In the mid to late 1990s, there was a small rural church in southwestern Minnesota that in its heyday was full of families, grandparents, children, grandchildren. It was a place vibrant with faith, probably started by pioneer types back in the 1880s. And after over a century of ministry, demographic shifts, economic shifts, it came down to just a few people in an old white wooden church surrounded by cornfields, beans, and oats. They put their minds and their hearts together, so they knew that they couldn't perpetuate that. There was too few of them, and no more were coming. The future wasn't there in that place. Instead of giving up, they thought about how they might take what they have, what they had been given, the faith of the generations before them, and pass that along. And so they decided to sell the property and invest those funds into other ministries in the area. And then with the building itself, they had a great idea. They approached Shores of St. Andrew Bible Camp and asked them if they would like a chapel for their properties. And so one July day, one could see a little white wooden church on the back of a semi-truck floating across the prairie. People came out to see that. It was an interesting sight. News crews showed up. It was on the evening news in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Minnesota being the land of gophers, well, no few number of gophers popped up out of their holes to take note of that as well. I got to see that chapel on the Bible camp property. I got to see it full of kids and the songs of their faith praising God. I got to see Bible camp buddies married there, their children baptized there. After all those decades of ministry that had happened, that had come to a close, there was new life. That church was resurrected in a whole new way. Here, we are not surrounded by cornfields, oats, and beans. We are surrounded by tens of thousands of people in a thriving suburb, in a thriving part of the country. We have every reason to believe the future is bright, that there is hope, and there we can put our faith. How can we say that? Because God is the God of the living. God is God of the living. Amen. I invite you to please rise and let us sing.